It's 6:30. We're gonna go ahead and start. First, I would like to introduce our new member, Cedric Johnson. Welcome. He is our newest member on the board. Would you like to say a few words? Would you like to introduce yourself?
I think it's important that I do. I don't think my name is on the web board, so I'll be transparent as I possibly can. I'll cover some personal information, professional information, and we could get back to the agenda. Personally, I'm a person of faith. I'm married. I have 3 adult daughters. My wife and I, we're empty nesters. We have 3 granddaughters, lived in Anne Arundel County for 13 years, born and raised in Texas. Politically, I'm unaffiliated with any political party. Professionally, I served in the Marine Corps 6 years, honorably discharged. Law enforcement, served with the Atlanta Police Department in a couple of different capacities. Patrol, served with special operations, driving under the influence task force. Also served at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport in a law enforcement capacity. Transitioned from law enforcement to public safety at airports. Served at Oakland International Airport, public safety and security at that airport. Came to Maryland in 2010, working for the Maryland Aviation Administration, overseeing public safety and security here in Anne Arundel County. I would like to thank the county executive, the county council, specifically Ms. Hummer, for making this opportunity attainable. And I would like to thank the board members and the community for the kindness that they have shown towards me as I come on board. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Cedric, we're very happy to have you on board. Thank you. What I heard him say in the beginning is he has room for my 4 kids. So if anybody else, he's an empty nester, anybody else has kids, we're going to drop them off. That's what I got. Very happy. I'm happy to hear your experience. We're happy to have you. We're happy to work with you. So next we're going to move to approval of the minutes. Did everybody get the minutes? Has everybody had an opportunity to review them? Just thumbs up if we've all seen them. Awesome. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the June board meeting?
I move, Madam Chair, that we approve the minutes from the June board meeting as posted.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Moving right along, we're going to go to public comment. Jen, this is the part where we accept public comment. I do see one person, but she is not present. It looks like Jen is saying. Miss Laurie Canavan has signed up. Do we see her yet? Miss Canavan, are you?
She's not in the attendees.
Is anybody out there that wants to give public comment? Is there anybody on besides us?
There are 2 other attendees. If you guys want to raise your hands if you'd like to testify.
Does anybody want to testify?
Nobody's raising their hand.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's no public comment, then we're going to move right on. We're going to move to the statewide PAB updates provided by Mr. Ethan Hunt from the Office of the County Executive. Ethan?
Sure. So Jeanette asked me to come before you all. Good to see everyone again, and just give a brief update. So a couple weeks ago, I was part of a panel discussion at the Maryland Association of Counties Summer Conference, which is a big conference in Ocean City every year for local government officials, elected officials, but also a lot of civil servants. So they get around 3,000 to 4,000 people every year at this conference discussing a whole range of issues. They have a lot of different panel discussions. And one, there's been, for the last couple of years, there's usually been a discussion on implementation of the Maryland Police Accountability Act and how it's going in different counties. So I was asked to speak earlier this summer and went ahead and accepted that invitation. So there were 4 of us on the panel that spoke. There was myself, and then Lawrence Scott, who's the county attorney for Cecil County, So we were kind of giving the legal perspective, having previously been with the Office of Law and advising the PAB and ACC, just on how implementation was going, things we had learned, tips that would be helpful for other jurisdictions. Then there was also Wilson Perrin, who's a former Calvert County commissioner. He was a past president of MACO, and he's the chair of their PAB in Calvert County, and it serves on their ACC. And then Dave Morris, who some of you might remember, who's now the interim police chief in Cheverly in Prince George's County, was there representing the Maryland Police and Chiefs and Sheriffs Association. So I think broadly, if I'm giving an overview, every county is up and running, which I think is a good thing. And some of them are, we are on the forefront of implementation, I would say. We are in a very good spot. Some of the other large counties are also in very good spots. I was impressed by how diligent and proactive a lot of other jurisdictions have been in establishing the new police accountability and oversight system. So I had 8 minutes to give my presentation on how we were doing things in Anne Arundel County. I gave a couple minutes of an overview just of how the whole complaint process works, just so people would understand, as we're discussing this process, how it goes. I did have a PowerPoint. I can share it. I don't know if Jen wants to share it. It's just, I can show you what I shared with them in Ocean City. I'd say there were probably, boy, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a full room, so I would guess there were maybe 75 people, 80 people there. So it was a good turnout. Got a lot of positive feedback on how we're handling things in Anne Arundel. And then there were just a couple issues that I sort of highlighted that I think in talking. So before I gave this presentation, I did reach out to counterparts in Prince George's and Montgomery counties, just because there are other large counties that have a lot of law enforcement agencies that they oversee. 1 second here, I can share this presentation with Jen. So just touching on a couple issues or challenges that, one, I know is an issue already in Anne Arundel and in some other jurisdictions, and a couple others that I think could be issues down the road. I know in talking to folks in other jurisdictions, the requirement for a decision being made on charging or not charging within a year and a day has presented challenges in other jurisdictions where you have criminal cases going on, either criminal investigations of an officer or criminal investigations of someone else, and a complaint was made about an officer that's involved in that, or where you have, Prince George's, this happens frequently. You have Prince George's has 29 law enforcement agencies they oversee, right? We have 5, and that can feel like a lot. They have 29. And so if a member of the public makes a complaint about an officer, it's not always immediately apparent which agency that officer works for. So there's some legwork that needs to be done there when you're trying to figure out who actually is supposed to be conducting an investigation. And then no jurisdiction has yet had a trial board. There haven't been any cases that have gone before trial boards. So there's a little bit of concern about how that process will work. I know, a year ago, everyone had a list of issues they thought would be problematic. And a lot of those have kind of worked themselves out, and people have figured out the answers to them. Again, trial boards, because no one has had one. No one, these concerns that people have, they're things that could be problematic. We're not sure if they will be or not. I know there's concerns about ending up with a backlog of trial boards if a whole lot of cases start going to trial boards. Some concerns about how you have attorneys representing a department prosecute a trial board when the chief may not, or when the charging committee may not agree with the recommendation of the chief. And in talking to other folks, I think that might be a situation where you go to outside counsel to have it. And then the last one that I touched on, just highlighting it. I know our charging committee works very hard. I know they're meeting, I think, 3 times a month, or you have holds on your calendar 3 times a month. Prince George's County Charging Committee is meeting every week. They've issued 89 decisions so far, and that's since March. And then there wasn't anyone on the panel, but Dana Moore from Baltimore City, who's the former city solicitor in charge of their Office of Civil Rights, was there, and she got up and spoke about the caseload they have, which is, I think she said they had around 900 complaints that they were working through. And their charging committee had just sent down 40 more cases to the Baltimore City Police Department for charging or not charging. So for larger jurisdictions, that workload can be a lot. And then I wrapped it up, giving them a couple folks in the audience, a couple additional resources. I don't know how often everyone here looks at the Police Training and Standards Commission website, but they update it fairly frequently with more useful information and resources. And then the couple work groups, both the work group to address police reform and accountability and the Commission to Restore Trust in Policing, they had reports over the past couple of years, and their reports gave a lot of recommendations that went into the development of the state legislation. So as people are looking for background information and understanding, that's a good place to go. And I guess just in wrapping up, I think there were several members of the House of Delegates there who serve on the House Judiciary Committee, and they really appreciated what we had to say, how things are going in Anne Arundel County. And I think some of them might be looking to address a couple of the issues that were raised this next legislative session. I'm not sure. So hopefully some of those will be looked at. But I'm happy to take any questions, any thoughts people might have.
Any questions, anyone? Sean?
Yes, and I know you said that we are comparably doing as well as the other counties. I guess, was there anything specific that you shared around about our process? Were there any ahas or, ooh, I can't believe you all are doing that? Or are we truly good?
So no, I mean, to the extent that they were, I can't believe you're doing that, it was in a good way. So I did highlight the fact that, I mean, our department, all our law enforcement agencies use the same software for their internal affairs case management. So that helps a lot. And just the way we have that system set up for case files going to the charging committee, Cecil County is doing it all by paper. They have everything. Their county attorney bought a safe, and it's all going. I don't know how they're going to do body cam footage that way, but so another point I raised, and in talking with folks in Prince George's, they were on the same page. So I think when we went about implementing the new law in Anne Arundel County, we did a good job of outreach with the other departments that aren't Anne Arundel County. And Prince George's did the same thing. They said they went to every, all 29 law enforcement agencies and the elected bodies overseeing them. So when we were developing this, we spoke to members of the city council in Annapolis to really get that buy-in. And I think that's some other counties are running into issues where they're not necessarily getting buy-in from the municipal police departments. And there's some tension there with what is being shared with the departments. One attorney had a story where he got a case file that was just a letter that said, we recommend the officer not be charged. There was no facts or anything to back up their recommendation or decision. So I think I think we have an excellent working relationship with the city of Annapolis. So I think that's important.
Thank you.
Barney?
Yeah, I haven't figured out how to raise my hand on the computer yet, so I'll just do this. But Ethan, I had one question. You said something about there are some things that they may be presenting this legislative session that will, I assume, impact on the accountability board. How soon will we know what those issues might be? If
I
we have
mean, if we won't know until but if there is legislation introduced, we won't know until it's actually introduced. Just in having conversations with folks down in Ocean City, I think there was some interest, not so much affecting the accountability board, but just clarifying how complaints are working their way through the process. And so I mean, what you don't want to end up with that year and a day requirement is you don't want to end up with a situation where an officer has committed misconduct and should be charged, should be disciplined, but the year and a day time has passed, and then so there's no consequences. So I think to that extent, ensuring that you don't end up with situations like that. And then another issue that was raised is that in the state law, there's language regarding how long an officer can be suspended without pay. And it's, I believe it's limited to 30 days under the new law. And so there might be circumstances where, for any number of reasons, a chief might wish to suspend an officer longer than 30 days, and they can't. So that's something that was discussed as well. I know that chiefs and sheriffs would like to see that amended, but I don't see anything significantly changing. I don't see any big wholesale changes, and I think the general consensus I got from members of the legislature I talked to while I was down there was that they want the system to work, and so any legislation that is introduced would just be geared towards making the system work better.
Anyone else? All right, Ethan, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along, we have the Administrative Charging Committee overview. That is going to be from our chairperson from the ACC, Andrew Miller.
All right, great. This sequence works out pretty well because I'll touch on a couple of things that Ethan said. So I was asked to just give an overview of the ACC's work. I think that a lot of this is going to be material that's like well trod for most of you. So I'd say please just tell me to speed up if this is just kind of rehashing what we already know, if you don't find it particularly useful. And also please interrupt me if you have any questions, if you have any comments, especially Sarah, if you want to add anything, please feel free to do that. Like I said, I'm just going to do an overview of the ACC, and I think we all recognize that this policing infrastructure is pretty complex and somewhat of a black box. So hopefully these sorts of presentations start to open up that black box at least a little bit. So if I were to summarize what the ACC does in a nutshell, it would be this, right? It makes disciplinary determinations related to citizen-involved complaints against officers employed with the county's 5 local law enforcement agencies. So let's start with who we are as a committee. If we looked at the composition of the ACC, it's 5 members. 1 member is the PAB chair or the PAB chair's designee. So in the case of Anne Arundel County, the chair has designated Ms. Cavett to be the designee on the ACC. We have 2 members appointed by the PAB, and then we have 2 members appointed by the county executive. And I just want to take a second to commend the appointments. I think as a group, the members are quite diverse. And I don't just mean that with respect to like demographics. I mean that with respect to backgrounds, with experiences, that sort of thing. And that's very, very beneficial for decision making, right? If you look at the behavioral sciences literature, you look at academic studies on this issue, the more diverse groups are, the better they are at decision making, right? And you can think about it intuitively, right? If everybody's like-minded in a group, there's really no point of having multiple people because people are, thinking alike, right? So that's been very, very helpful, and I think very beneficial to the ACC, and that's thanks to the county executive and the PAB. All right, so we have 5 members, and from those 5 members, we select a chairperson. So I was selected this year. And then that is statutorily required. So like within law, we have to have a chairperson, right? But we also decided to have a vice chair. And the purpose of doing that was just to have continuity in the chair's absence. So if the chair wasn't at a meeting, we know exactly who will step in and continue the process. So in our bylaws, you can look at the election procedures for this. We elect the chair and the vice chair. We decided to do just yearly terms, and then we elect them every February to make that decision. So it's a one-year term, like I said, starting in February. All right, so we have 5 members. One is the chair designee of the PAB, 2 from the county executive, and then 2 appointed by the PAB. Within the ACC, we have the chairperson and the vice chairperson. All of us on the ACC have gone through this training from the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. So I've done a lot of trainings in my life. You all have probably done a lot of trainings in your life. This was on the, I would say, like the upper quartile in terms of like usefulness for this training, right? This was a good training. It was a useful training. It was like a real training. It was candid. And I think it was quite helpful for preparing us. So, and I find that not just after the training, but just as we've gone along and continued with it. So it's a useful requirement. I'm glad it's in place. Okay. All right. So that's who we are. Before I go on to how we operate, I just want to stop. Are there any questions, any comments, anything anybody want to add? All right, let's keep moving then. So this is the process that's laid out in the on the PAB website, Anne Arundel County's PAB website. And this is kind of like the full 1,000 feet overview of the process from the complaint all the way to the conclusion. Okay, so I'm gonna try to break this down, simplify it, and then focus specifically on where the ACC fits into this process. So if I were to simplify it, I would put it into like 5 steps, right? With respect to how a complaint gets processed, right? And so the first step here is that a complaint is made against an officer, and the complaint must involve a citizen. So one thing I think that may be not necessarily a misconception, but may not be easily, I don't think has been like diffused and maybe into the public, is that the complaints just have to involve a citizen. A citizen doesn't necessarily have to make a complaint, right? So a complaint can originate with a citizen submitting it to the PAB, or a complaint can arise from a citizen submitting it to the police department or the law enforcement agency directly, or a complaint can arise from Officer A submitting a complaint against Officer B based on, say, how Officer B's handling of John Q. Citizen, right? Even if John Q. Citizen doesn't make that complaint, there still can be a complaint that reaches us that we review, because it involves a citizen. All right, so that's step 1. Step 2 is that the law enforcement agency investigates the complaint, and it's investigated by the agency where the officer works or is employed at. Step 3, this is where the ACC comes into play. We review that investigative file and we make a determination. Now, if we decide not to administratively charge, at this point, it's over, right? The process is done. There's no administrative charges. That's effectively it, right? If we do decide to administratively charge, that's when the law enforcement agency head will discipline the officer. And then the officer has an option. Then, as Ethan was talking about, his options are either to accept that discipline, or to take it to a trial board to try to have it reversed. There's actually some other additional options as well, but like I said, let's keep it simple, right? All right, so we have 5 steps, and again, building on what Ethan said, and this is something that concerns me, and it's something I've been harping on for a while now, is that this year and the day timeline, right? So the ACC has 1 year and 1 day to review a complaint once it's been filed and make that determination, right? So we have to make the determination a year and a day after it's been filed. So after step 1, we have to complete step 3 within a year and a day. The issue here is that there's, as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong, there's no procedures or regulations surrounding when the law enforcement agencies have to transfer those files, right? So in theory, they could transfer them pretty late within that window, especially when you have criminal charges as well against the officers, and that could ultimately overtake the year and the day timeframe, right? And it's not just about the fact that we might not be able to make the determination in time, right? So even if we're getting close to the date, we might want to request additional information, and that would like hamstrung our ability to do that, because we're within that year and the day, or the year and the day window is coming up. So we have limited time to request additional information related to a case, right? So that's that. I'll move on before I get too high on my soapbox here about that issue. But anyway, so let's focus on specifically step number 3, the ACC, how we make our determinations. Okay, so this process really begins when the law enforcement agencies transfers an investigative file to the committee members. And that's interesting what Ethan said, how there's some counties doing this all paper-based. It sounds like there's real variation in like how that's happening. For us, we're doing that completely electronically. And that goes for at least the big 3 agencies, like here in the county, right? The county police, the Annapolis City Police, and then the sheriff's office. I'm not sure exactly what will be the process with Crofton or the community college, just because we haven't gotten that far with them. But at least for the big 3, we're using what's called evidence.com. And it's worked out pretty well, considering you can put the case reports on there, the investigative reports on there, the body cam footage on there. You can link them together, and it's fairly well organized. And I think Captain Schultz and his team over at Anne Arundel County PD were quite helpful in setting that up for not just the county, but for other agencies and other departments. So I think that's been a plus for sure in our process. All right, so we've received the investigative file. The members of the ACC have received the investigative file from the law enforcement agency about a citizen-involved complaint. So what do we do with that file? We can break that down again into, like, I'd say 3 steps. So we're within step number 3, and there's 3 steps, we'll say, within step number 3 on how we make this determination. Okay. So the first thing is that ACC members are asked to review and assess the case independently to make a preliminary determination. Okay. So why independently? Why would members be asked to review it and assess it on their own before coming to deliberate on it? It avoids what's called like groupthink, right? So groupthink happens when you have a group of individuals who get around a table, and they tend to gravitate towards the dominant hypothesis without fully considering some of those like alternative hypotheses, right? But if everybody's kind of individually evaluating this case, you're not being influenced by others at this point, right? So it can be pretty helpful for, again, trying to maximize the accuracy of the decision making. Okay, so assessment is done independently. Then we get together and the members convene to share their preliminary determinations, what they've came up with independently. We discuss the case, and if needed, we'll request more info. We'll bring in perhaps the investigating officer, ask them questions, ask clarification on, say, policies. Why'd you find this? What was it about this that made you say this? Why are you recommending this determination, et cetera, right? And a process that we go through to make sure that when you have group discussions, you could have like dominant personalities dominate the discussion. That's just how it is. Somebody who's extroverted versus somebody who's introverted is gonna talk more and talk first more, right? So to avoid that situation and to avoid having a kind of personality driven these discussions, like I'll, as chair, randomly select who starts the discussion. And sometimes I'll even use like a random number generator to identify who starts the discussion. So the idea there is that we don't have one individual who is like consistently out in front driving the discussion, but it's done by kind of uniformly and not biased in that way, right? Okay, so we've all assessed the case independently. We've talked about it. And then we come to either a consensus or say a rough consensus, taking preliminary votes and that sort of thing, okay? And then finally, we make the determination, and the determination isn't final until there is a motion and a formal vote to adopt that motion on the final determination. This is, again, probably old hat to all of you, but what we're deciding is whether or not to administratively charge or not administratively charge the officer who is the subject of the complaint, okay? If we decide to administratively charge, there are a number of other characteristics of the case that we need to decide on. We need to decide on how severe the violation is, and that's based on categories, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We decide on the category level, which is based on the number of prior violations that officer has had. We look at mitigating and aggravating factors. So mitigating factors, was there something about this case that made it not quite as bad as it appears, or not, or maybe the officer had a violation, engaged in a violation, but there's some factor that suggests it was not the officer's fault was mitigated in some way, right? And then there's aggravating factors, which talks about whether or not the officer really had a problem and did engage in the misconduct in a very significant way. And then we talked about then we identified the discipline for the officer, and then any non-disciplinary action that the officer receives. All right, so that's if we administrative charge. If we don't, we have to decide on whether or not the allegation is unfounded. So we're saying we do not think this officer should be administratively charged. If there's not enough evidence to say whether or not the officer did or did not engage in misconduct, then we're going to say that it's unfounded. If there's clear evidence from the investigation that the officer did not engage in misconduct, then the officer is exonerated in that case. So think of it as kind of like a branch, two branches, kind of algorithmically. If you administrative charge, you have to decide on all these things in the left-hand column. If you do not, you decide on the right-hand column. So just briefly, this is what the document that we use when we do make a determination that the officer should be administratively charged. And this is how we identify the level of discipline. And this is used across the state. Okay, so this is not an Anne Arundel County specific document. This is laid out in, I believe it's COMAR, which lays out this entire framework. Okay, so let's say this is a very relatively low level violation, something not particularly acute, parking violation, late for a duty assignment, improper attire, something of that effect. Okay, that's going to be a category A violation. Okay, so we'd identify it as a category A violation, and then we'd ask ourselves, or we'd see, based on the disciplinary history of the officer, whether or not they've had one of these violations before. And let's say they have had a violation in the past 24 months, that would make it level 2. Okay, so we're at level 2, category A, level 2, and then we're going to be discussing mitigating or aggravating factors. And that will determine the discipline. So let's say we identified some aggravating factors related to this officer. We're going to be on closer to the right-hand side of the spectrum, and we might vote for a 1-day loss of leave or pay. Okay. Now this is on the low end of the spectrum, right? This is not too severe, but there are 6 regular categories that go all the way up to category F, right? And category F involves serious bodily harm or even death. And that is pretty straightforward in that case, right? 1 violation, you have to terminate the officer. Okay. All right. So we've made our determination. After that, the written determination is transferred to relevant parties, the LEA head, the accused officers or officer, and then the complainant by the Office of Police Accountability. So that's that. That's the process. One question that some folks might wonder is like, okay, the ACC is a public body, just like the PAB. Why aren't these deliberations public, right? This is supposed to add transparency to the process, and that these deliberations be public. Well, by law, they're not meant to be public. Okay, so the ACC has a statutory requirement to maintain the confidentiality of the proceedings. So while we talk about all our policies, we talk about as much as possible in a public environment. When it comes to actually deliberating on the case, that's going to be done in a closed meeting, and that's pursuant to these general provisions articles 3-305B1 and then 3-305B13. Okay, that's who we are, how we operate. Just to wrap up here, what has the ACC done so far? Like, where have we been? The Office of Police Accountability, Jenna Moya helpfully put together the stats on our caseload to date. And you can see here, we've had 12 cases presented to the ACC. Some of those cases involve multiple officers. So in total, we've evaluated cases for 16 officers. And when a case involves multiple officers, we treat each officer individually, right? So we don't look at them together in the sense of we vote on 2 officers at once. No, we look at Officer A and then Officer B. And then within a given case, an officer might be charged with multiple, might be investigated for multiple alleged violations. And then we're going to look at those charges individually and vote on those. Well, we don't vote on them individually, but we'll talk about them individually, come up with it, and then they'll be wrapped up into that formal motion at the very end for that officer. So you can have multiple alleged violations, and we've done 19 charges, alleged violations to date. It's written here as total charges considered. And then we have, of course, cases pending. We always, at this point, we almost always have cases pending. So that's why we're meeting 3 times a week. Some of those numbers out of like PG County are pretty eye-popping. I wonder, I just wonder how they do that, right? Considering you have 5 individuals in that huge volume. So those are the case numbers. What have we decided so far? So this is a very high level overview. The preponderance, or like the plurality of cases, we've administratively charged. That's 42% of cases. And then the other cases we have not administratively charged, and those are split between, we voted to either exonerate the officer, or we found that the charges were unfounded in that case, right? So you can see it here, 42% administratively charged, looks like 36% exonerate, and then 21% we found that the charges were unfounded. We didn't have enough evidence either way to say what happened in the case. Okay, average turnaround by the ACC, so it's about 15 days when we receive the file. I think that's pretty good. We have 30 days to respond, either to make a charging determination or request more information. Average case age at submission to the ACC is 199 days. So I think an average, we all know how averages work, right? So they can include outliers, and if you look at them as a distribution, there's going to be some that were much fewer. The investigative files were submitted much sooner, right? So that gave us a lot more time to evaluate the case. There's going to be some cases where the investigative files were submitted much closer to that year and a day deadline. So 199 is the average, but again, there's that variation, there's that distribution, there's that range on it. So, in summary, we're off the ground, we're up and running. There's definitely room for improvement. And I hope with the continued assistance from OOL, OPA, the MPTSC training, like I mentioned, and from others, we can continue to make those incremental improvements. But by and large, I think given the timing, I think we have some solid footing. So with that, questions, comments, concerns, I genuinely, and I really mean this, I want feedback, either positive or negative, on what we can do better. And you can either email me directly, or feel free to email Boy and Jen, and then they can get in touch with me. So thanks, thank you very much. Sarah, do you want to kind of moderate, or should I just call on folks? What works best for you?
Yeah, you can go ahead and call them. I don't know if you want to stop sharing so you can see everybody.
Yeah, good idea here. All right, I think Daniel, I saw your hand up first.
Sure. I was just curious. It looks like roughly 50-50 versus of the cases were actually exonerated versus actually charged. I didn't know if you've had any like informal or formal feedback from the officers involved with any kind of recommendations or questions.
We have not, no. So
Okay.
really, once we send that letter off to the agency, we're pretty much done at that point.
Okay.
I'd be curious. In some ways I might be hesitant to interface with the officers, especially after a decision has been made. But I'd be curious, do you think that would be useful, or do you think maybe they should speak to you all, or what do you have in mind with that?
Well, I think I was thinking that the rate might be higher of those. I mean, I don't know, what were you expecting when you started out?
In terms of what we would find for the breakdown, or?
Yeah. Is that pretty much what you expected, or?
So you expected more administrative charges? Is that?
I kind of did, yeah.
That's a really good question. I didn't come in with a strong prior view on what I would expect. Yeah, I just didn't. And I'm trying to think why is the breakdown like that? It's hard to say. So much of this is about not really our like our decisions are like pretty well governed by that matrix and like by establishing a preponderance of evidence and that sort of thing. So much of it is about like the selection of who's making those complaints, right? And I think a lot of times the complaints are not just don't necessarily meet the level that would be needed for them to be an actual policy violation. It's just sometimes they're like misunderstandings, etc. Yeah, I mean, I just didn't have a strong prior. So
Thank you. I was just kind of curious, as we're reviewing. So thank you.
yeah, definitely. And I would be curious, like if you all look at that closer and like have input on that, I think it would be something to like really like evaluate our decisions more and hold us accountable. Like I definitely would welcome something like that. Kenneth, please.
Good evening, everyone, and I apologize for my late entry. Thank you for the work that you all have done, Drew. You guys have done a great job. Question in maintaining the records. I see that for one violation or the second infraction within 24-month period, it graduates as far as accountability or reprimand under a Cat A. How long are those files maintained in their personnel file or maintained by the police department itself? Is that for the life of the employment, or does it go away? I think sometimes with union issues or whatever, that a counseling notice only remains for a year or whatever. So how do you vet that?
That's an excellent point. And that came up in the training, and the short answer is like we do not vet that, right? Like we do not get involved with like the overall like records management of the law enforcement agencies and that sort of thing. So we will, every time we're going to request those records. I have not, as to my knowledge, I don't recall a situation where they say like we have destroyed the records or we didn't keep records to that date. Like as far as from what I remember is they always have had the records that they could produce for us. But if I remember rightly, I think the PAB report from last year talked about some of those issues that you're bringing up, and those are definitely, I think, worth kind of following up on and working with the agencies. Sarah, do you want to jump in here and can you, yeah, what do you think? Do you recall any issues with them with the lack of provision of those records? Or?
Well, I think the most important part here is that when we get to that step, we ask questions. So when we see the file, we start asking questions and then our questions are answered. So we just ask questions. And when we have questions about the records, we pull the relevant people in and we ask the questions and we get the answers. So to us, it's sort of unknown too, and we're not the keeper of the file. So we start asking the questions: is everything there? So we're entitled to we're allowed to ask those questions, and we get the answers as we ask them.
Thank you.
That's a good question, and again, just a good issue to like remain mindful of, especially as the PAB goes forward and like thinks about its priorities. Barney, I think I see a hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. You made a comment about the interviews. Have you had any instances to date where you found a need to contact the complainant to get their side of the story as you hear it, or have you found any need to interview a complainant who's filed a complaint to ensure that what you've received from the PD is accurately a reflection of what was said to them?
Yes, so that's a good question. I want to be careful that I'm not talking about like specific cases or anything like that. I think I will say generally, it appears to me, based on what I see in the case file, the investigative file, is that an investigation will universally or close to universally, they're going to interview the complainant So that, of course, is taken into consideration. But again, I want to just keep it general and make sure I'm not talking about any specific cases here.
Sure, as part of the ACC, though, are you allowed to, in fact, call in the complainant or have contact with the complainant?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
Yes, I believe so. I mean, we have in theory, we have, or not in theory, in fact, we have subpoena power, right? So I don't think we would probably have to subpoena a complainant. But if we have that, I don't think there would be anything that would prevent us from doing so. Does OOL want to jump in here, or Moya or Jen, perhaps?
That's certainly within the committee's prerogative to speak to a complainant. That, you know, these cases may often, you know, have video or audio interviews too that help shed light on this. But while I'm on here for a moment, I did want to chime in on Dr. Moore's question, which was a very good one. The concise history is what comes from each of the police departments, and they don't exonerated or unfounded. All of the charges stay on those records for their history. So that's our experience. We've been seeing them. It includes all of the charges, minor to major, past discipline history for each of the officers.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Hey,
feedback?
Andrew.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say, Barney, that while we talk about like the need to interview, and I can't imagine what PG County does, because for us, like, one case can take anywhere from an hour to 6 hours to review. That's just one case, because they're so extensive and they're so detailed. So the police departments aren't just throwing up, random pieces of work. They are detailed. There are videos upon videos. The statements aren't just written. They are body cam footage. They are recorded interviews. If they can't get the face, they are telephone conversations. So, I mean, I spend hours during the week reading and listening to this evidence.com. So I can't imagine what the other counties are doing, because it's labor intensive for us. So we haven't come to the point where we would need that, but there really are, they put a lot of effort into this.
Yeah, not wanting to question the degree to which they've conducted their investigation. You'd have a better feel for what they've done than we would. Curious whether there had ever been one case where we say, hey, we need to and maybe contact to hear the word complainant. But
yeah, I mean, I would definitely, I'll just, again, speaking in general terms, like, I would definitely be open to that, and I would welcome that. And I think the other members would as well. So yeah, that's definitely on the table. It just goes, every opportunity I get to reinforce it, I'll reinforce it. It just shows like, that's another reason why we need to have these case files well in advance of that year and a day mark, because okay, we interview the complainant, that raises 3 more questions. We need to interview someone else, right? And we are constrained by that at the moment, right? And I'm not saying like that has prevented us specifically from interviewing a complainant. I'm just saying that it hangs over, that timeline hangs over us as we're reviewing these cases. Cedric, did you have a hand up earlier? I might have missed you.
Yeah, I pulled it down, but I do have some questions. I'm pretty new, so pay no attention to the new guy.
No,
but
please.
I have a question. When you talked about unfounded and exonerated, unfounded really means that the individual, you cannot determine either way. Can that unfounded category be resurrected later on if a similar situation occurs, or unfounded is permanently out of bounds from that point on once that determination is made?
That category would be, my understanding is that category, that finding would be part of the officer's disciplinary record, even if it's unfounded. So I want to just bracket that and go to OOL in a second here to get confirmation or not, if that's the case. to minor when I've seen some disciplinary records might say unfounded, et cetera, right? There was an allegation, it was unfounded. So that will be part of the record. Now, when we're going to that disciplinary matrix and deciding on the level of the category, if it's unfounded, we would not be, to put it for lack of a better term, we would not be counting that against the officer and then moving that up a level in terms of the discipline. But we would still, given that it's included into the disciplinary history, could take it like and consider it holistically. Thomas, can you just double check me on that? Is that the case? Like if it's unfounded, it's still going to be in that history, right?
It would, but it would not reopen in the future.
No.
And it would not count against as a previous offense.
Yes, yeah.
Totally understand. And one other follow-up question, and that'll be it for me. Really good information. I appreciate the presentation. You talked about the Comar law and the prior incidences that could be considered for disciplinary action. Is there a different level for citizens received complaints compared to non-citizens complaints, or do they have a hierarchy? These are more important. They came from a citizen, but this complaint may have came from within the police organization, and it's not from a citizen.
We don't, like in general, like we don't make we don't really distinguish, like as long as it's involving the citizen and the citizen was like on the, receiving end of a misconduct, whether or not it was that citizen who filed it, or if a fellow officer filed it, that wouldn't, speaking at least for myself, that wouldn't change how I would evaluate or assess the case. But I want to make sure, am I understanding that question correctly, or are you asking something slightly different?
No, the example you used earlier, you used like if a person commit a parking violation, I think. That's a very minor issue. That's not a citizen. I don't know if a citizen complained about an officer violating the parking law or something. I would see that as a non-citizen complaint, but I haven't been educated in that particular area. Would that even rise to the level of something that you would toss into the pool of evaluating on this new complaint?
Yeah, so that would count, like that would, so if you, maybe I should just put it up again and like, so if you check out this disciplinary matrix, that it's on the PAB website, and perhaps, if it hasn't been sent to you, I think, it makes sense to send it to you with like within the packet of materials that you receive for your onboarding. So like within that disciplinary matrix, it will give examples of what is, say, a category A violation. And one of the examples in a category A violation is parking violation. What exactly they mean by that, it's a little bit ambiguous, like some of the language is ambiguous. But so if, let's say, Officer A had a parking violation that was determined as a category A misconduct complaint, and was charged for it. And then 6 months later, the officer has another category A level violation. We're going to take into account that initial category A violation when we're determining the level for the disciplinary history. Now, if the officer A, same officer, has engaged in this category A violation, this parking violation, and is now alleged to have engaged in like a category E violation, which is really serious, that would not be sufficient to move up the officer a level. The officer would have had to engage in another category E violation to move up in that level. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's basically the prior violations matter to the extent for the levels when that prior violation is of the same severity, is it within the same category? Sarah, did I get that right? Can you add to that?
Yeah, in short, it's basically progressive discipline.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that information.
Sure. All right. Thank you all. Like I said, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Barney, please.
Yeah, it's for you and Sarah and perhaps Thomas as well. Help me to recall, we as part of that PAB are looking for policies that may need to be altered or changed a little bit, or practices that maybe are not quite what we think they should be as a PAB. Do we, Sarah, get these completed cases so that we can kind of look for anything we might see in terms of maybe policies that need to be tweaked or practices that maybe need to be looked at again? Can you help me with that?
Yeah, so that's a question I think for Thomas, how it goes full circle back to the PAB.
Right, so it's intended to be confidential until all of the process is played out. And that it would include, for example, if a officer had a right to a trial board to the end of that trial board and then an appeal therefrom. And then there are the closed cases. But the way that this legislation is written, it's written in the with the light of transparency. So I do think that once that all of the processes have finalized, it will lean into the area of transparency where that information would be shared.
Have we had any of those cases that that have reached that level yet?
Whether the cases that have been adjudicated unfounded or exonerated. So those would be at that stage.
And I think if any of these cases go to a trial board, does that mean that information comes public at the trial board stage? Is that right, Thomas? And
generally, we haven't had one, as Ethan said, but generally trial boards are open to the public, but you would have to go to that location to watch it. I haven't seen any yet that go like statewide, kind of like we're doing right now, invited the public in that fashion. Usually you'd go to like a visiting station. So they are private in a sense, but we'll have to see what that process looks like going forward.
I see, Kenneth, you have a hand up?
To date, with the cases that you all have adjudicated or reviewed, do you foresee any that may have risen to the level or a time in which an officer might exercise their right to a trial board?
It's ultimately up to the officer's discretion, so it's hard to know without, I'll say this, like when Ethan just mentioned that no cases have been brought to a trial board across the state, that was very, very surprising to me, like very surprising. And I would say I'm, somewhat surprised that we haven't had any go to a trial board, right? I'm not disappointed in that by any means, but it's interesting, and I need to do more homework trying to understand the incentives of why these officers are not taken to a trial board. It's interesting, and I'd like to know more. So it's a really good question.
My initial thought is that I don't know if the officer sees it in the same context of like a federal charge that's brought, and because of the thoroughness based on what Sarah has said, and you, Andrew, that when the department submits their profile packet and the evidence being so overwhelming or whatever, that they don't want to exercise that right, or this is just something new. I just wasn't sure what the circumstance may have been and what you experienced based on going through the information.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something I'm going to look into, and I'd be interested if the PAB looks into it as well, like what they find in that regard. So I didn't have much of a prior in terms of like how many we would find administratively charged, how many we find exonerated. I did think that there would be a decent proportion of the officers who were charged taking it to the trial board, and the fact that they haven't is like I said, it's surprising.
I think if I would just chime in there that, in the past, it was 3 officers would be the trial board. Now you have ALJ, a member of the public, and an officer. So that may cool their heels a little bit, thinking that, they're uncertain of the results. But when you have someone who's charged with termination, who feels like they didn't do anything wrong, they're going to go to a trial board and to keep their job, to keep their career, to keep their pension. So it's coming. It maybe just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. Talking to folks in other jurisdictions, I think you'll start to see some trial boards within the next few months, or trial boards being requested.
Andrew, I think we've all said that. Thank you guys for what you do. You're obviously very busy. So again, it's quite a mandate that you have, but you guys are still, so that's good. Thank you again. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I know I certainly appreciate the appointment. I know others do. And like I said, I think it's a solid group, different viewpoints, and I think ultimately that makes for really solid decisions. So thank you for that.
Andrew, your presentation was awesome. Thank you for coming. All right, we ready to move on? Everyone good? All right, here we go. Next up is the Office of Police Accountability with our Executive Director. You ready? Ms. Panda,
Thank
you're up.
you. Yes, good evening, everyone. And I want to also say thank you to Ethan for his presentation and to Andrew for his presentation. One thing Ethan mentioned, I happened to be at Mako and I watched his presentation. He did a wonderful job. There were so many people who were engaged, listening, and ready to see how the accountability process has gone so far, in Maryland. I was also encouraged to see the members of the Maryland House Judiciary Committee. They were there. I saw them taking notes. Other counties have reached out to me to see, obviously, if we can get our recommendations over to them to see if anything can be done in the next legislative session. So that's a really, and we all want to be on the same page. And speaking to Montgomery County, Baltimore County, as ACCs and PABs, we all want to be on the same page statewide, and hopefully we can get that done. And also for Andrew, he mentioned about the trial board process, and I think I want to just give a nod to the ACC. I think another reason in Anne Arundel County why we're not seeing a lot of trial boards is, you heard Sarah say, you can take 1 hour to 6 hour. They're reviewing everything. And I think the ACC has been very fair in their determinations. And I think when you have the disciplinary matrix that guides you with how you are looking at the disciplinary nature of your recommendations, it's pretty a fair process. And I think, at least I can only speak for Anne Arundel County, the ACC, they really are, reviewing the files and discussing it back and forth and coming into a decision, so that I want to pat them on the back to say that's probably why we don't have a trial board yet, because we're being very, very fair in the determinations. For my update, I just want to remind the PABs that you do have to complete your ride-alongs before the end of the year. I did hear a lot of you all have done it already, but just make sure. Jen did send out an email. If you haven't scheduled your ride-along yet before the end of the year, please go ahead and get that done. That is required as part of your position. Also, the next PAB meeting is going to be September 25th. It's usually scheduled for 6:30, but please note that the time has been pushed to 7 p.m. Please update your calendars. Next PAB meeting, September 25th at 7 p.m. And this is where the law enforcement agencies are going to give their quarterly updates. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. So we are getting to the end. Does anybody have any new business? Barney?
It's not new business, but I do want to thank Jennifer for all her involvement, keeping us up to date, sending out the emails, and sometimes she plays that background, but it's really appreciated what she does for us as a PA. And thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. All right, well, it has come to the end and we are right on target with
I have a
Jeanette's very
question.
scheduled calendar. Oh, Kenneth, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. 2 quick questions. One for Moya. Do you know if there's been any discussion at the state level to have an annual gathering of PAB, maybe ACCs gathering together in some kind of convening moment where we can interact and cooperate one with another. Different boards.
Not on a statewide level, but I am in contact with some of the larger jurisdictions. So hopefully by this fall, we'll start scheduling meetings with the PAB chairs, the executive directors, and possibly the ACC chairs to have us connect with each other. I'm probably going to start out with Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and more than likely Calvert County as well. So we'll be on the lookout. We'll probably have some updates with the meetings that Jeanette and I, probably maybe Andrew as well, are meeting with the other jurisdictions. And yes, the goal is, from speaking to my other counterparts, is to have a yearly conference or something of that nature, to get really just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Right, for continuity, I think that would be very helpful. Also, Jen had sent out the Google sign up or the survey or whatever to sign up to attend various community meetings. When I went on there, it only allowed for one event to sign up. And then it said that the time or the had met the quota or whatever. Is it possible to attend multiple meetings?
You should be able to. Let me check that. Yeah, you should be able to. Let me check. There might just be a setting that's wonky.
Okay.
Yes, you should be
offline.
Yes, and you should be able
great.
to attend multiple meetings. The only thing that we will say, obviously, we want to make sure we have no more than 3 members at a time at each event.
Okay.
Anyone else? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Are we all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Great
Good
job,
night.
Sarah.
Great job, Sarah.
Good job, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you.
Do you have cookies for us, Sarah?
Listen, Jeanette told me to be done at 7:45. Those were my directions, to be done at 7:45.